Well, hi everyone, my name's Ivan and I'm the founder of a business called Happy Ground, and what we do is we help staff with their well-being and also their performance. And at the conference what I'll be talking about is mindfulness, and the title of my presentation is Mindfulness: How Being Present Impacts Health and Safety in the Workforce. Now, there are these two issues that I'm going to talk about and how mindfulness can potentially have a really positive impact. The first is around our health, and the second obviously is safety. But the first one with health is a really interesting one, I think, and a very important one. And a key to it is stress. Now, there was a report a few years ago by the by the University of South Australia for WorkSafe Australia, and it was called the Australian Workplace Barometer. And it did a really good job of kind of summarising the problem, in essence, the source of the problem, which is stress. And that is essentially that we have a very competitive global environment, an economic system that increases competition. So we're all pedaling that little bit harder than each other in order to get ahead. This can lead to, and has led to, organisational change in an effort to do things for less and do them better. It's led to some downsizing, work intensification. Job insecurity has been one side effect of this. A lot of people on short-term contracts now. We have longer working hours, and also there's always the problem of a diminishing range of resources in order to achieve the sort of outputs that we want. So it's not a great picture, but the consequence for us in terms of our mental and physical health is quite significant. And the main thing that happens is people find themselves under more pressure and become stressed. Now, a small amount of stress in a workplace can be good. It can encourage us to work a little bit harder and more effectively and so on. But if we have too much stress, if we have, I guess, what's known as distress, then this can be really quite bad for our mental and physical health. Now, in terms of the sort of outcomes we're seeing in terms of mental health, typically when people are stressed, they become sometimes a little bit irritable, they can become withdrawn. So you'll see these sorts of changes in behaviour. But the other thing that can happen, which I think many of us, or most of us, will be aware of now, is that we're seeing some mental health problems as well in the workforce. So things like anxiety and depression are becoming a real problem. The Australian Workforce Barometer said that about 20% of people in workplaces have mild levels of depression, and this is a really massive problem. There are also side effects for our physical health. Now, these generally aren't felt straight away. These are often long-term. But the main problem is in terms of cardiovascular problems. So heart disease, angina, these sorts of problems, stroke. These are diseases that we find occur when people are under stress for a long period of time. Basically, our arteries harden and it leads to all these problems for our long-term health. So stress is a major problem for people's health and well-being. And of course, the immediate thing we see, other than the fact that people who are at work can feel distressed and so forth, is that we see greater absenteeism. This obviously has an impact on the company's bottom line, and presenteeism can be a problem as well. People who are at work have other things on their mind. They're not really focused on the job. All right, so the question I guess I'll be posing then is there a way to alleviate stress and mental and physical health problems, absenteeism and presenteeism all at once? Can we do that? And I think to some degree the answer is yes. And I'll talk to you about the solution in a little while. But I'll move on now to the second problem, which I'm going to talk about at the conference, which is safety. Now, safety is obviously very important in the workplace. There are work health and safety guidelines for new workers in Tasmania that have been produced And they very nicely sort of summarise what's supposed to happen in a workplace. Now, workers are supposed to have responsibility for a number of things, but three of them which I think are pertinent for this discussion is firstly to obey all reasonable instructions. The second one is to follow the safe procedures of doing the job. And then the third one is not to put yourself or your co-workers at risk. So, historically, I think it's probably fair to say that rules and regulations have played a very big part. But it's become increasingly, people have become more aware of the fact that our behaviour actually makes a massive difference. It's not just machinery and rules and regs, but it's actually the behaviour that people have. Now, I found a nice quote from the manager of DuPont in Australia, going back about 10 years. But he said that, and I quote, "In our experience, 95% of accidents occur because of the acts of people. When you've done the technical things, you've only just started." And I think everyone knows that. Behaviour really matters. But the other part of behaviour, which I think is really important and important for this discussion on mindfulness, is really about the question of awareness and whether people are attentive to what they're doing. So where are their minds? You know, are they on the job, doing the job, totally focused in the present moment on what they're doing? Or is their mind in the future or the past? Is it thinking about something other than the task that they're doing? And I think that's a very important point, and a very one that allows for a lot of improvement. Now, there's not a lot of data around in terms of this question of awareness and workplace health and safety that I could find. However, I did find on the internet some information from the University of California School of Medicine, who looks at accidents. And they said that 70% of their top injuries involve a subject who is inattentive or distracted. So that maybe just gives you an indication. We've had the DuPont general manager saying that 95% of accidents occur because of people. Then we've got this other little bit of data that suggests that, well, inattention and distraction and so forth is really significant in terms of accidents. Now, in Australia, I did find some information in terms of car accidents. There's some information from the Monash University Accident Research Centre, and they say that 62% of car crashes in Australia are due to the inattention or possible inattention of the driver. So if we apply that to a workplace situation, a figure similar to that, we're starting to get to the importance of inattention in terms of workplace health and safety. Interestingly, that paper on car crashes actually said that most of the forms of inattention are preventable, and I think it's probably true in workplaces as well. So the question for this then becomes around safety and awareness is, should we rely on regulations, rules and procedures to keep people safe? And of course, I think the answer is no. We need to look at what the person's doing and also what's going on in their mind at the time. You know, are they living in the moment? Are they fully attentive, or is their mind somewhere else? Okay, so this brings me to mindfulness. Now, mindfulness has been defined as the open and active attention on the present moment. So it's bringing yourself right into the here and now. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. Most people will be familiar with mindfulness practices. So a mindfulness practice involves having a mental anchor. So it might be something like focusing on your breathing, for instance, where you just notice, you know, the in-breath and then the out-breath, and you just focus on that. That is your anchor. Other anchors might involve things like noticing parts of your body. So you could scan your body and notice different parts of your body. You might like to observe what's going on around you. For instance, you can do an exercise where you're just sitting in a room and listening to the noises around you. Or perhaps you can observe what it is that that's in the room. All of these things involve having an anchor, bringing yourself back to that anchor as your mind wanders. And that's basically a mindfulness practice in a nutshell. It's about having a focus and then bringing yourself back. Because of course our minds naturally wander. This is how they operate, unfortunately. So the key is really to learn to train your mind, and in doing so improve your concentration, but also reduce your stress levels and become more aware of what's going on around you and also inside your body and your mind. All right, the other part of mindfulness is there's the sort of formal sit-down practice, which I've just talked about, but there's also bringing mindfulness into your daily life, and this is really important. In some of the courses that I teach, I suggest to people that not only can they do the practices, but they can also practice, say, 5 minutes a day just living in the present moment. So the example might be if you're at home and you're doing the dishes, I want you just to do the dishes, right, in that 5-minute period. So just the action of doing the dishes is all you want to think about. You don't want to spend your time thinking about work or something else that's going on in your life. You just want to bring yourself into the present moment. And then again, that's very good at improving our ability to do a task. It can reduce our stress levels and it raises our awareness. So those two things, having a practice and bringing it into your daily life, are very, very important mindfulness practices which can offer a number of benefits. Now, mindfulness is becoming increasingly popular, and I think pretty much everyone would be aware that mindfulness is becoming more popular. It started, mindfulness as a practice has been around for a very long time, but it's been around in the West since about the 1970s. And it's become increasingly popular. Part of the reason is that there's a lot of research around now. So we know that mindfulness has a lot of benefits for us. In the workshop, I will talk to you more about what those benefits are, but suffice to say, it's very good for our mental health and also our physical health. And the other thing, I think, which is really interesting is that mindfulness is becoming something that is being practiced in workplaces. And it's not just sort of white-collar workforces. We're seeing it in all sorts of different environments now. One illustration is the Canadian police force have been doing a mindfulness practice for quite a while now. There's an image you can find if you just look up Canadian police force on the internet. There will be images of policemen and women sitting in meditation chairs doing a mindfulness practice. And I think that's just fabulous and an illustration that everyone is now getting into this, and there are good reasons for it. All right, so just in summary then, what will this workshop do if you come along? We'll explore the ability of mindfulness to address our two main problems. So the first one is around health, and in particular that issue of stress. And the second thing we'll look at is safety and in particular the importance of having awareness at work. Now this is an emerging area, I think, of research and practice. I think it's very exciting. It offers a lot of potential, I think, for people to improve health and safety in the workforce. Mindfulness isn't something that is that difficult to learn. You just need to develop the habit and get develop some skill. When you do that, you can see the benefits. So it is very exciting. The workshop will be experiential, so I will guide people through a mindfulness activity and give them some tips and tools on how to bring it into their daily life and also how to do it as a practice. We will have a discussion towards the end of the workshop about how mindfulness could potentially be of benefit in your workplace. And I'll also talk about some of the research around stress and so forth, and how mindfulness can assist. Anyway, thanks very much for listening. It would be lovely to see you at the conference. So yeah, thanks very much for listening, and have a great day. All right.